I'm asking you, I'm going to just put that away now because it isn't really a prompt. I'm going to ask you, how do you identify yourselves? And is it on your education? Is it on your property? Is it how you look? Is it on your social circles, the community that you think you're part of, etc., etc. So when you're doing your elevator speech, and some of you who've been for interview, and especially for Nuffield interview, will know how difficult this is, because often the opening question is, tell us a little bit about yourself. And our challenge in that is to say, well, I'm X number of years on the planet. How do I give a succinct answer here? And what we hear from people when they answer, tell us a little bit about yourself, is what are the strongest identity factors they have. So often people will talk about the type of agriculture that they work in, or they might talk about their education, and they may identify themselves by their qualifications. They may identify themselves by the region that they're from, the co-op that they're part of, etc., etc. So how do you identify yourselves? There's no right and wrong in this, folks. It's just looking at what comes to mind for you in terms of how you identify yourselves. So just jot down, just take 2 minutes to jot down how you identify yourself. What things do you associate with yourself with? And then I'm going to give you an exercise. So for those of you who have done unconscious bias training or any diversity and inclusion training before, you'll probably be familiar with this exercise. It's no harm to do a sense check and a check-in with yourself to see, has there been any change since the last time I did this? So the first part of the exercise, don't do anything else until you've this done first. The first part of the exercise is to identify the trusted 10. And the trusted 10 means the people that you go to for support on decisions, the people who influence you most in your life, the people that you choose to associate with. So ideally leave family out of this. You're ideally going to your kind of your next circle. So your circle of friends, your circle of colleagues, your circle of through the communities that you're with in. So take a few minutes to fill that out first and just put down their first name or their initials. So as soon as you've those names down, start filling out the other boxes then, please. So just go through all the names and fill out their gender, their age, their race, religion, education, whether or not they have a disability, and that disability can be intellectual or emotional or physical, their sexual orientation and their marital status. So when you've that done, folks, just want to ask you another question. So if you think of the circles in your life, so your immediate circle is those that are closest to you, those that are invited to weddings and family events, and your next or birthdays, etc., etc. Your next circle of friends then are those that you would associate with, and those that you would maybe associate with, and there would probably be a social crossover. And then the third circle, which tends to be our most diverse circle, are those that we meet at conferences, those that we meet occasionally, those that we work with from time to time. And think about who is it in the outer circle that might tick some more of these boxes, some different boxes. And is there greater diversity in your outer circles, the more occasional connections? Often what we find with the Nuffield journey, and I appreciate that yours has been curtailed significantly in terms of your capacity to travel at the moment, but you're still exposed to the diversity that is your 2020 group. Usually we find that people's exposure to diversity on the Nuffield journey explodes in comparison to the normal day-to-day, and there is an opportunity now for things to be a little bit different. Because usually what we find as we go through the Trusted 10 is that we are drawn to like. We are drawn to people who look like us and think like us. And the challenge with that is that it creates blinkers where this is normal and anything outside that is different. And how do we expose ourselves to different and stand in the shoes of or walk in the shoes of different, so we begin to understand it. So what I'd like you to do now is break out into your breakout groups and just look at what came up for you there.
So I'll open up the rooms and you should see that come up.
So what came up for you, and maybe what is the one thing that you're going to do throughout your Nuffield journey to expose yourself to greater diversity? What is the one thing you'll do for yourself?
So Karen, you're not in a room. Did you want to be assigned to a room?
No, that's great. No, I might have a quick chat with you then, because I meant to ask them questions and get them to write in what they hoped to get out of this, and I forgot about that, sorry. But I might ask something else now when they come back.
Sure.
So John, Catherine, Gary, and Ingrid and an iPhone are still waiting to go into a group, are they?
No, they shouldn't be. John, hang on. Where did you see that come up?
So they are, oh, maybe not. I beg your pardon. Maybe so. Everybody started disappearing off my screen, but these are the names that are left. No, so.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm not in
You're
the group.
still yeah. Anybody we see,
John.
I think anybody we see. So Johnny Gardner and Jose Manuel and Shota.
Hang on. I don't know if I know how to now put you in a.
But we can just be one big group then.
Am I meant to click on something?
Did you get it? Sally Thompson.
You should have. Yeah, Sally's just arrived, so I can say assign. I say I'll just assign you to breakout room 1. Yeah, so Johnny, your name should come up and say assign, but it's not there. So that's weird.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that.
In waiting room, I don't want to.
So for those that are with us, though, can I just ask you what has come up for you so far? What did you know maybe, and what is new?
Well, amazing so far, Karen. It's awesome. The internal bias that we all have is extremely deep. But for me, it's a reflection that I need a bigger support group, and very much of outside of family. It's friends that are very much like me, that I grew up with. So, and to be honest, there was all guys except for one. So, with diversity of thinking, I think it's a massive part that I need to push myself into, especially with personal decisions, but also with business as well. Great chat and great conversation to have.
Okay, good. Thanks, Johnny. Jose, you're on mute, but if we can go to you next.
Sure. Hi. As Johnny says, once you think in your family, friends, closer people, you're always related to people, things like you, and that's easy. But I'm a little bit older than maybe most of the guys here. I have the opportunity to travel, and then once you have that opportunity, find people totally different, and your mind gets opened, and then you realize that you're not necessarily on the right thought always, and that there, diversity, and it's extremely, nice to see that. Open your mind. And that's what I see so important, the opportunity for all the guys that participated in Nuffield, because they not only had a different experience, but they first of all meet people that think differently and have different beliefs and that. But yeah, the truth is that in my country, in where I live, the closer people, and that's the easy way. Find people that things like you.
Yeah, and often when you bring in different into your circle, they're not supported in your circle, and sometimes they work their way back out. That you get all your friends' judgment going, hey, what's going on here? Or so it can be a challenge to be a stoic friend to different as well when it comes in. So widening the circles means that there's usually greater tolerance in the wider circles, and you're not judged as much for stepping outside of the norms. Okay, great. Thank you both. John, do you want to say anything? John's my boss. He's staying quiet. Jody, do you want to say anything, or will we pull everybody back?
Sorry, Karen, I was on mute. I didn't quite catch
all right.
you there in time. Sorry, I was slow on the unmute button.
That's all right.
No, similar to Jose and Johnny. Actually, when you reflect and when you ask the question, it does highlight maybe the similarity and maybe the close dependence maybe on family support and not as much on the outside support. And again, there is some diversity among the outside support. Would find that on maybe a couple of categories like disability and race, there is no diversity, unfortunately. It's very, I suppose, very standard across that. But maybe it does focus, as Johnny says, it does highlight when you're asked the question and then you sort of have a blank on it. It does highlight there is work to be done, that you need to act on. So yeah, very interesting exercise. Well done.
Good. Thanks. Thanks. Jody, will you toss us back into the whole group then, please? And move it along.
60 seconds. Everyone's got to rejoin.
All right. Okay. Very good. Very good. Yeah, because one of the things that comes up because the Nuffield journey doesn't end when the paper is presented, as Jody and I can attest that it continues forever. Is everybody back? Sorry, folks, I'm just checking now as people are coming back. Or 60 seconds. No, Hetty has just come in. Hi, Hetty. Henrietta, I'm calling you Hetty because I heard somebody else do that and I'm taking liberties.
Yeah. That's Australians for you. I always shorten everybody's name and then sometimes it's not appreciated. We've got about half back in.
Okay. So I'm just going to move through my slides now.
That's everybody.
That's everybody. Great, folks. Thank you. So a couple of things there to follow up on maybe with you. One of the challenges that, first of all, if anybody has anything to say or if anybody has any questions, will you write it in the chat? Or if anybody would like to touch on anything in the rest of the time we have, to explore it, will you write it in the chat, please, and I'll pick it up. One of the challenges that awaits us all, and I say us all because it's 2012 since I started on my journey, and I will be in the community, in the family, the Nuffield Church, for the rest of my days, because there is no not being in Nuffield. And the great advantage of being in Nuffield is that you're constantly exposed to new opportunities. And the difficulty is that when our circle lacks diversity, we're taking the new opportunities back to the old circle, and we're asking them for advice, or we're asking them for their input on our decision, or asking them for support on our decision. And it can be very difficult to get that. So just, I suppose, flagging that for you, that over the next 5 and 10 years, things will come up, and you need to have built your team of diversity or diverse supporters around you, so that you can go to people who think differently, who can give you different advice. Because one of the things we talked about in the smaller group there is that one of the challenges that we face in bringing diversity into our existing circle is that it gets judged. So because you're open to and see the value of diversity doesn't mean the rest of that circle of 10 are going to see it, for example, or that next circle of 20. So that when you introduce diversity, often it gets judged or it gets slagged, and you have to be a stronger friend or a stronger colleague and more stoic. But if there's a critical mass of diversity, then you have another team to go to help you think, and to help you think differently, and to face some of the big challenges that you're going to face, some of the big decisions that you have to make, but also to tease through those big opportunities that will come your way, that is a consequence of being in Nuffield. So I mean, maybe thinking about that and what actions you can take so that you're starting to put what we say deposits in the emotional bank, i.e. you're building your social capital and you're building your social network, so that you have trusted people there when you need them. And the other thing to say to you, and most of you know this, and I'm looking at some of the faces on the call, some of you are a lot younger than Generation X, that Generation Ys and Millennials and all of anybody under the age of 45 really is looking for greater diversity. And certainly in the 20-year-olds, the tolerance of racism or lack of diversity in thinking or lack of equanimity in thinking is zero, or it's certainly very low. Interestingly, my father was running the farm at home until very recently. Now Dad is 80 this year, and it wasn't until, so an all masculine household, as I said to you before, but we started getting French students in, female French students. So we had 4 in a row, and Dad is living on his own. Mum passed away just before my scholarship, and Dad has thoroughly enjoyed the company, because he just brings him to life when there's somebody else sharing the space with him. But it wasn't when one of them in the early years put a mirror up to him and said, "I can't tolerate how you treat your animals." Because when Dad was growing up and when I was growing up, animal welfare was a very different conversation. And if animals were misbehaving, we behaved differently, you know, tie them up or restrain them or whatever it was. And it wasn't until this 22-year-old put a mirror up to him that Dad's behavior changed fundamentally. And now my brothers are going, why didn't that happen 20 years ago? Like, but it took, so what does it take to bring new thinking into a system? Anyway, it's different things at different times. So my point was, and I distracted myself, sorry, is that the generations coming up after us won't tolerate what we've tolerated, and they won't tolerate us thinking or behaving in the ways that we accepted from our parents or that we think is acceptable from ourselves. So just to be cognizant of that. The other one I just wanted to flag to you is privilege, and this has obviously come up a lot in the last number of weeks, particularly in terms of white privilege. This is slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I just want you to look at it. Check your privilege bingo. So just take a look at it yourself and look at how many boxes you get to tick. That you may not have thought of. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. You may not have thought of as a privilege. Joe Leonard, I apologise now for the redheads. I didn't write this. It was written by somebody else. The Irish people are on a disadvantage there on that one.
Karen, what's cis, the second box?
So I'm afraid to give the definition now, but it is straight, I think, or non-pan or non-trans. Not straight, but non-pan or non-trans. Somebody younger on the call is probably going to have a better definition of that. Please jump in if you do. Jodie, how are we for time? We're nearly wrapping up. Okay, I'm just going to go to one last exercise with you then, please.
Yeah, that's fine, Karen. I think as people need to leave, they'll just jump off. So just continue on.
Great. Okay, great. Some of you will have come across this concept of limiting beliefs and enabling beliefs. And it was just something I wanted to go through with you because there are a lot of things that we say to ourselves that mean we self-select ourselves out of opportunities or we belittle ourselves. Most of you will have heard of the concept self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is self-belief. And most people putting themselves forward for a Nuffield will have a certain amount of robust self-efficacy. But some of you, and you know who you are, would have required a lot more encouragement or support. And the advantage of enabling beliefs is that those with a greater self-efficacy or greater enabling beliefs get further. They tend to gravitate towards leadership. The other thing that we must maintain as we develop our self-efficacy or self-belief is humility, because as we get older and move into positions of authority, our ego gets stronger because it needs to be stronger because we need to be able to fight for the things that we believe in. But the downside of ego getting stronger is we can sometimes lose humility in that and begin to see ourselves as better than others. So how do you manage that? The other side of that is where the limiting beliefs are so prevalent that we define our lives by what we think is appropriate or possible for us and what is not. Whereas were somebody else walking in our shoes, they might have a very, very different set of parameters around that. So I suppose a question that I would have for you is what are your limiting beliefs about yourself? In terms of your intellectual capacity, in terms of your financial capacity, in terms of your capacity to love, parent, succeed, write, present, all of these little demons come on our shoulders when we're doing a Nuffield, because Nuffield throws a lot of things up for us to consider and to deliver on. So just have a moment. I'm not going to ask you to share this now. Just have a moment to think about what are your limiting beliefs about yourself. Those with a propensity to worry or to anxiety tend to have more. I say this as somebody who's walked in those shoes in the past. And the thing is that if we're indulging limiting thoughts, limiting beliefs about ourselves, we're more likely to have limiting beliefs about others, about what others are capable of. And therefore, we close off opportunities for others because we're seeing them from our paradigm. And this is something that as leaders, we need to take responsibility for. So one of the main things that came out of the review of the Department of Agriculture was that there was a benevolent paternalism where a lot of the senior staff felt that it would be unfair to put a woman with small children into a particular role because it would impact their family too much, or it would be too stressful for them. And the women in the department turned around to them and said, "But that's our decision. Give us the decision to make that." And we may say no, but we may also say, well, look, there are other copings. And you've all been through this journey yourselves because you're all leaving your businesses for chunks of time as you go on your Nuffield journey, whether it happens this year or next year. So what are the coping mechanisms that you need to employ? What are the limiting beliefs that you needed to overcome to do Nuffield? What are the limiting beliefs that you need to overcome over the next 2 years? But the other reason that this comes into play is that I want you to picture something now for a second. So imagine that somebody that you work with, or a Nuffield scholar who you admire, whose thinking you admire, whose attitude you admire, rings you, and you see the name coming up. So imagine who it is, and then see the name. So what is your reaction? What's your physical reaction when you see the name coming up of the person that who you admire? And they're saying, "Listen, any chance I could have 5 minutes?" How are you likely to respond to them? And what are you likely to give of yourselves to them? So park that one now for a second. So somebody that you worked with, somebody that you maybe currently work with, who is of a different level of output and a different mindset to yourself, is ringing you now. So think about who that person is, who you struggle with. What happens to your physical reaction and what happens in your mental reaction? And they're looking for 5 minutes. What are you prepared to give? How do you feel yourself reacting to them? And usually what this process tells us is that those that perform well and are like us or have a similar attitude, we're much more likely to invest in them. We're much more likely to champion them or sponsor them or mentor them or invest in their development. Whereas those we perceive as underperformers, we're less likely to invest in. And it's just something to consider. How do you manage your beliefs, and how do you manage your mind so that you can develop those that need it as a Nuffield leader and as an employer? So again, I'm asking you to just jot something down. What can you do more or less of in terms of developing underperformers, developing those that need your support in your circles? Okay, Jody, so what I'm going to do, Jody, is send on these slides. There are a number of YouTubes built into them. There's a number of TED Talks built into them. There are some articles on unconscious bias. So if you get a chance to just go through it, they're only about 12 slides. Just go through it and click on the links and see what comes up for you. There is an exercise at the end as well. When you do get traveling again, I'll just show it to you. We won't go through it now because, sorry. So as you journey, right, some of you will be going to Europe eventually, some of you may go to Asian countries, etc., right? So what are you going to meet in the new environment? And what is expected of you? And what actions do you need to take? So this is a useful exercise in terms of thinking yourself into the shoes of your hosts or your host countries or the people that you're likely to meet. And just look at how you react to them. Because one of the intelligences, you know that you've heard this, I'm sure, before, that there are many different types of intelligence. Logic, linguistic, spatial, kinetic, etc. But cultural intelligence is one of the intelligences that scholars get the opportunity to develop because they're stretching on that journey. So that capacity to meet new and different and respect it and respect the cultural norms of where they're at. So in developing your cultural intelligence, taking the time to think through some of these new norms that you're going to meet and how you need to be so that you can be culturally intelligent in that space and respect them is an interesting exercise. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now and stop sharing the screen and say, look, if anybody has any questions, will you put up your hand or send them in the chat, please, and I'll be delighted to answer them.
Karen, one of our scholars, Tammy's had to go, but she'd love to get in touch with you afterwards and talk about that more. Yeah. You can see that in the chat.
Karen, I just wanted to say that was a really good talk. Yeah, really enjoyed your input.
Thanks, Alan. Nice to meet you. Good on you.
Whilst we're just waiting, if anyone has got a question, I should just say that when I did my CSC, I'm the same year as Karen, so we're 2013. So I arrived after 32 hours of journeying from Australia to get to Guelph, Ontario, Canada, which was in March. It was very cold still. And as is quite often the Nuffield way, we were, rooming with other scholars that we didn't know. So I arrived quite late in the evening and used my room key to walk into a hotel room, which was already occupied by Karen, who was my roomie. So my very first Nuffield roomie was Karen Brosnan. She was sitting on the bed and meditating, just the picture of calmness, and said, "Don't mind me, make yourself at home." And I think, look, it's probably a cultural stereotype, but I do find the Irish have an amazing warmth and the ability to make you feel very welcome and very, very much at home. So Karen's always done that for me, and I hope you agree that very interesting presentation. Karen has a wealth of knowledge that she's very generous in sharing with the Nuffield network.
Thanks a million, Jodie. It was one of the high points. Jodie was, my first Australian that I met in real life, because in little old Ireland, and you were so classy. And I sat beside you sticking acupuncture needles into myself, and you were like, fine, yeah, take that. So whatever I threw at you, you were equally respectful, and a lady. Thank you. Okay, will we call it a day then? Alan.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just thinking about the 10 trusted people that are closest to you and how diverse they are or not. And I guess that the default position for most people, well, there's probably not a very diverse group. I don't know, but that was sort of my experience as I thought it through. Do you think is that a natural defense mechanism or coping mechanism whereby, we develop a group of mentors who do think like us, who do have the same values and background, because by bouncing situations off those people, we're more likely to get an answer that actually sits well with us. You know what I mean? But I can see the benefit of diversity for challenging you to think differently in certain situations. But is there a natural defense mechanism which actually causes us to have a circle of relatively narrow people around us?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Alan. Our human tendency is to comfort and to familiar. And one of our challenges, and a lot of industries are beginning to look at this as well. There's a great business leader called Ricardo Semler from Brazil. He has an excellent book called Maverick, and he says that he's got some great TED Talks, and he says, look, the car industry has been designing a similar shape for nearly 100 years. They're not much different, 4 wheels. You know, why haven't we designed a car that when you come up to a car parking space, just sidles in? Why do we have to go through all this reverse parking? And he said, because every year engineers are hired from the same universities with the same kind of qualifications and the same kind of thinking. He said, why aren't there artists in the design teams? Why aren't there other disciplines? Why aren't there psychologists? So we weren't having these conversations 10 years ago, Alan. So the world, as it has become more globalized, is asking for greater diversity and greater collaboration. And I guess that's the thing, really, that this D&I wasn't a subject that you would have been trained on in Nuffield 10 years ago. So yes, we have a human tendency, and the world that we now live in is asking us to challenge that human tendency and overcome it and stretch, so that we're seeking different insights and different inputs into our thinking. I hope that's answered your question. Yeah, confirmation bias. Yeah, thanks, Johnny. There was a slide with a list of biases in it there. And there's an article at the end from The Guardian that is a very good kind of breakdown of the different biases that we experience.
Thanks, Karen. And as Karen said, those slides will be available. I do have to admit I forgot to press record until halfway through, but we will have the slides.
Yeah, okay. Yes, you will.
Available. So I'm terribly sorry about that.
Yeah.
Just before we go, a quick reminder that there'll be a post-webinar survey, so please fill that out. We will send around Karen's email details, of course, with the slides, so you'll be able to get in touch if you have other questions that come up as you start to digest some of that information. And to let you know, don't forget next month, of course, we will have another webinar in the last week in July, which is the 24th. That will have a dairy focus. We'll have 3 scholars who are all dairy farmers. We have Paul Niven, an Australian who lives and works in China for Fonterra, has very interesting insights of what it's been like to be working there during the COVID era, 2012 scholar. We have Paul Mumford from Victoria's 2009 scholar, who is currently the chair of the dairy group of the Victorian Farmers Federation, so does a lot of work in policy and government, so we'll be hearing from him. And our 3rd scholar is David Byrne, who's a 2000 scholar actually from the UK, who now lives and works in Victoria on a dairy farm. And when he was travelling in his scholarship year in the year 2000, one of his fellow travellers was stuck in America when the Twin Towers came down, and he was stuck in Australia when there was a foot and mouth outbreak in the UK. So a lot of learnings there, I think, that we can compare and contrast to what's happening now in the world. So thank you again, everybody, for coming on to the webinar, and particularly to Karen to presenting for us. And that's it, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good
you
night,
very
folks.
much.
Thanks for your time. Bye.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you, Shota.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you, Bruce.